Can everyone hear me all right? I'm not mic'd up. All right, so thank you, Eric. Steve Rizzu is always an easy speaker to follow, so your presentation was very insightful. Before I get started, I was also told to tell everyone to find a seat, so we'll give it a minute. I'll take a quick second to introduce myself. My name is Dan Frick, and I'm responsible for the DLA and USTRANSCOM relationship at SAP. So I'll be up here several times today introducing some of the speakers. So thank you again for attending. The next topic we have is the United States Transportation Command and its journey to global multimodal transportation. And the speakers we have today are Mr. Rick Marsh and Mr. Soren Hastrup. So Mr. Marsh, a member of the Senior Executive Service, is the Deputy Director, Strategic Plans, Policy, and Logistics at U.S. Transportation Command. Mr. Marsh is also the Director of the USTRANSCOM TMS operational prototype in coordination with Soren and Team Telesto. Our second speaker, Mr. Soren Hastrup. Soren is the CEO of Telesto Group, one of our sponsors that we mentioned earlier, and has been a long time standing great partner with SAP. Thank you, Soren, and has a significant footprint in the DoD, specifically in the Army and Transcom. So with that, gentlemen, thank you for being here today. Welcome. Come on up.
Thanks. Hey, good morning. Apologies for busting the beard theme already. If this is the third annual, if there's a fifth annual, I will need to start now to be prepped. Thanks for hosting this event. Thanks for the opportunity to share what we're doing at Transcom. It's pretty exciting times. Soren and I have a pretty straightforward agenda. We'll walk through the problem we're trying to solve, kind of the vision we see a transportation management system could do for us, and then Soren will get into the specific tools and capabilities that his group is bringing to bear to help develop a solution. And if there's time, happy to answer any questions that you have. And for an admin note, I was told to let you know that there will be mics in the room, so look for those if you do have a question. But before getting into that, I wanted to give a quick overview on USTRANSCOM. I know there's folks in the room who have a very, very deep understanding of what we do, but given the audience, I think it's good to set the context of what we do to help frame where we see a transportation management system helping, and then where we see it having no play at all. General Lyons, he's global combatant commander, ultimately responsible for deploying and sustaining the joint force at the time and place of our choosing. He's got 5 global responsibilities. If you think Transcom is about moving stuff, you are mostly right. He is the single manager for transportation, which is pretty apparent in name but not in scope. So think tens of thousands of shipments every month, billions of dollars in annual spend with companies all over the world. Single manager for patient movement. Probably one of our most overlooked UCP missions, moving 7,000 to 8,000 patients around the globe for care. TMS right now will have nothing to do with that. Mobility joint force provider, basically teeing up strategic mobility options for the chairman. Joint enabling capability provider, nothing to do with transportation. After Joint Forces Command was disbanded, this was a capability that the DoD wanted to preserve, was put under Transcom. It's basically the ability to build a joint force headquarters on short notice for limited duration. So think really talented, highly trained communicators and planners. And then finally, the Joint Deployment and Distribution Coordinator, which outlines a coordinating role for joint deployment and distribution operations and planning. So just like SOCOM has a coordinating authority role for countering VEO, Transcom has a similar role for transportation, for the deployment and distribution enterprise. General Lyons does this through his 3 component commands. So we have an air component, the Air Mobility Command. So think about air terminal operations, cargo aircraft, air refueling assets. The Military Surface Deployment and Distribution Command, our Army component. So think about port management, truck and rail moves, really focused on getting the Army, projecting Army power. The Military Sealift Command, which manages and maintains the strategic sealift fleet. And then what General Lyons calls his 4th component, which is industry. About 90% of what we do is done through commercial providers on a yearly basis. Framing the issue, we see a TMS helping us really with that single manager for transportation space, helping us do that mission, and then also giving us the data to the insights, the context to enable us to perform that coordinating role in a more meaningful way. So to execute those current responsibilities, we manage currently about 100 mode and service specific systems to plan, order, ship, track, and pay for transportation. So what do I mean by mode and service specific? So depending on where you are geographically, depending on what you want to move and how you want to move it, you will present that transportation requirement with a different system, right? Potentially built in a different decade by a different provider on a platform that may or may not be compatible with the tools we want to use today. So the crowd will probably not be surprised that we have issues integrating that, right? Trying to knit all of that together to build an enterprise view of the things that are important to us. Capacity, requirements, cost, performance. It's really difficult to see that. So the graphic here attempts to capture some of the issues that we have. We introduce seams into the process with all of those different touch points, all of those different systems, all of those very boutique and tailored processes. And our doctrine introduces seams as well, the way we segment modes along the way, right? So somebody's responsible in CONUS, TRANSCOM's responsible for the strategic legs, and then it gets turned over to a theater for theater operations. Really complicates maintaining visibility, and then any attempt to maintain an audit trail, right? Pretty difficult for us. It's also a very linear process, very CONUS originating, not in line with the way the National Defense Strategy demands that we operate today. It suggests a lot of mess on the front end, but it's messy on the back end too, where all the geographic combatant commands have a different process for handling transportation once it's in their theater. So my take on that is if you have all the GCCs using a different platform, if they're not integrated from a data and system perspective, it's a pretty big gap for us that we're looking to fill. These issues have been around for a long time, but last summer, senior leaders came to the conclusion that it was problematic, maybe insane that we didn't have a modern TMS in place to help us with this, particularly after seeing that companies have solved this problem, and we're maintaining a pretty vast, again, over 100 systems, about $400 million a year in IT spend to keep all of this going. So our commander at the time, General McDew, directed a 2-year prototyping effort, and that is when Soren waltzed into my life. So we're currently 7 months into that prototyping effort where we, in this case, happen to be assessing an SAP product, looking at the operational utility of out-of-the-box, non-customized SAP TM capability to help us get after the challenges I just described. So we're partnering with INDOPACOM. We're using their AOR as our sandbox. And we've got several scenarios using AFIS cargo, DLA cargo, and some Army unit moves to assess this. The working hypothesis going in, again, industry has solved this problem. I have no doubts on the technical capability. For me, what I really think we're assessing is the department's willingness to change, right? So all of the systems that folks have invested their careers in building that commands and personal identities are associated with. For better or for worse, processes that we've used since the 60s on the documentation and payment side. So I think that's really what we're assessing in our prototyping period. Are we willing to bend to be able to take advantage of a modern capability? Soren will get into the specifics of how we're tackling the process and his processes to help us integrate all of this together. But I did want to share a word on kind of the cultural things I think TRANSCOM is doing a really good job of on this prototyping effort. I'm sure this is not the first time you've been in an event where you've heard TRANSCOM talk about solving hard problems with technology, right? I mean, people have heard this before. So I think I'm very proud of the team in recognizing for what this is. Not a technology issue. I mean, fundamentally, this is a process issue that we're getting after, and I think understanding that up front, clears a lot of hurdles, and I think gets us on the right path. And the second is just how collaborative I think the team has been. From day one, we've had service and industry reps at the table to help us figure this out. This is not going to be a group of TRANSCOM employees sitting at Scott Air Force Base telling the rest of the department how we're going to operate. Why do I mention that? If for the DoD folks in the room, if you're interested, if you think you should have a seat at the table, you have a seat at the table. Please let me know, because we frankly need all the help we can get to make sure we tee up a good decision for General Lyons on the future of this. We've got about 18 months left to row very hard to understand the capabilities and the limitations on this. so we can tee him up to make a decision on whether or not this is the future of what we're going to do. So this graphic represents our vision, what we think the TMS could do for us. I will not suggest a single system, but we do envision a primary system to help us handle our deployment and distribution mission. We think it'll allow us to better manage capacity, better maintain visibility of global requirements, knit together the geographic combatant commands, and ultimately tee up better options, more transparent options from a cost perspective to our supported commands. At the same time that TRANSCOM came to the conclusion that this was probably a good thing from an operational perspective, the financial community identified a transportation management system as a potential solution for the congressionally mandated audit compliance. So we're a lot of interest with the financial community. I know that a TMS won't make us auditable, but I don't see how we can achieve that mandate without a standard platform like a TMS in place. And then finally, from a big data perspective, right now, go back to the previous speaker's point on the disjointed nature of our legacy portfolio. If we can deliver a cleaner, more complete data set, I think that's ultimately foundational to getting us to where we want to be on the big data front. So with that, I'll stop here, turn it over to Soren, describe how we're getting into this. Thanks, Soren.
All right. Kind of before I get started, there's some very wise people out in the world that talks about why we're doing what we're doing. So today, Rick just talked about kind of the strategic imperative of where we're going. Today, I also want to make it very, very personal. So back in the room, where's Chris? Stand up. There's a young man. He happens to have the last name as myself. He's our newest intern, 19 years old, ROTC, future officer in the Army, or whoever else want to recruit him, so go at it. And thanks, Chris. Thanks for coming. This is about leaving a better place and a better system. I've been involved in DoD ERP since 2002, and in many ways it's been mortifying to follow that journey. It cost a lot of money, but really to Rick's point earlier, it's very, very challenging what we're trying to do. And TRANSCOM is really no different. So thanks for mentioning that. A little bit about the project. It was an OTA acquisition. It's a 14 weeks process we went through, pretty rapid. 22 vendors. We ended up at the end with a great team of SAP, KPMG, CACI, Western Archer, and a few other stragglers. But ultimately, it's a team effort that we've gone after. As you see, it's a global operation. Ultimately, we're not getting after all of this in a prototype, but there's a lot of users we got to get after. There's a lot of freight spent. It's 24/7 operations that we ultimately got to get down to. So there's just a lot of really challenging things. The 7.2 legacy systems, I've heard anything from 120 to even more than that, and then you account Microsoft, Excel, in everything combatant commander who's trying to actually figure stuff out. Excel. If Microsoft went out of business, we would be in deep doo-doo. And then, of course, the last one is audit compliance, and we have a pretty unique solution for how we're getting after that, and KPMG is helping us in this area, so a little bit getting ahead. But what are the key challenges? One is obviously to provide this global visibility. How do we get there? Change management is probably going to be our linchpin. Think a little bit about DLA, Army. How are you going to serve us these requirements to us? What's that going to look like? That's going to take long-term some re-engineering. And Mr. Dwyer, wherever he's sitting in here, I see you down there, how do we get you down to the last mile one day? Not in the prototype, I promise you. But we talked about this a lot for many, many years. So there's many things that we can get after. Data management, and another really critical challenge for us. Where are we going to get all the products, masters, vendors, customers, locations? How's all that data going to feed to this TMS? So we are wrestling with this today as part of this prototype effort, and we'll get into a little bit on that. Carrier networks and current policies. When you think about 90% of the department is moving stuff in commercial carriers. That means we're not just dealing it with internal capacities and issues, we're also dealing with commercial carriers that has been in our facility out in by Scott Air Force Base, where we're collaborating with them, trying to figure out how do we do this better. I remember one of the carriers in one of our meetings was saying, my government business is 10%, but it is 60% of my labor. to manage because we are managing things very archaic. On one website, they have to go click enter every minute to see if there's new tenders and opportunities. No direct connectivity. It's just really, really a big challenge for the carrier. So we are looking at some of that. We're not going to get after all of it. Re-engineering the TM to really function inside the current capability. So when we talk about we don't want to do any customization or out-of-the-box solutions, we still have some constraints. We still got to operate, of course, inside the current operations. And then we're trying to move really, really fast, 14 weeks from an acquisition. Within 4 weeks after that acquisition, we had the system stood up. I'll talk about that in a little bit, some of the speed. So what are we actually doing? We have 4 releases planned in 24 months. The first release was really to build out the network in the US. This primarily is getting all the locations identified, the business partners, and then some of the key nodes that we're going to get after in the next releases. This is going live in 2 weeks. We started March 1, going live with this. We loaded over 7 million materials, 300,000 partners. I can't even tell you how many locations. The next release, we're going to take cargo, move it out of California. Maybe we'll start earlier in the network in Pennsylvania. We're getting after that as we're speaking. This is our release 1.2, going live in May. Again, we're getting into the islands and then moving it from the islands to the final destination, whether it's in Kona or any of the other islands. This is going live in May. We're finishing up blueprinting in 2 weeks. Needless to say, while we're moving very, very fast, we have all the same challenges that all of you who've done ERP have. Transformation, OCM, getting decisions made quickly, moving out. Rick's leadership has been imperative in this. And this is one of the things that I think is really, really different for TRANSCOM. We were sponsored right out of the gate with a 4-star support to his deputy, who's been at our facility many times to promote this program and work with us, and of course, Rick's day-to-day guidance. It's super important. The next release is 1.3, coming later in the year of 19. Here we're going to go into Japan and Guam. And again, we're basically extending the network out, right? So we're taking it Pennsylvania, California, into the islands. Now we keep going off. And finally, we're going to try to get after 1.4, which will be our final release. A multi-staged approach is what we're envisioning right now. Obviously, getting after some of these trade issues and documentation we got to get after. So that's overall our release plan. Now, how do you move fast? How do you get to this 14 weeks of acquisition? We signed the deal roughly on the 21st or 22nd of February. We got the white paper 10/28. We went through the acquisition, was selected end of January, 4 weeks of negotiation. To the credit of the command, and I have to give myself a little bit of credit. We took an enormous amount of risk. This is a fixed price deal. We didn't have a scope. We didn't have requirements. We have a couple of guys sitting at a conference room that this is really super exciting. Let's just do it. And literally, that's what we said. Now, there's probably going to be some pain to be paid on both sides as we negotiate through this process because everything changes over time. But that's how we did it. From a technical point of view, if you go to the bottom of this, you'll see the SAP HANA Cloud Platform. Working with the SAP team, starting Reese and his team all the way down. Great partnership. This is a software. Did I lose? Oh, there we go. And as we mentioned earlier, about within basically 2 weeks, the cloud platform was stood up. And within 4 weeks, we had all the applications stacked on our development system ready to go. And within 8 weeks, we were running workshops already for the first release. It's unheard of going from basically start up a program, and within 8 weeks, you're having people and a facility stood up, and we were ready to go. So while that's a lot of sausage creation, and we haven't created any capabilities yet, it is that speed that has enabled us to now standing by November and being able to launch the first release. The rest of the stack you'll see in here, we've got a pretty robust, of course, SAP Transportation Management solution that we are assessing. And the command have been very open about this. This is an assessment for them. we have to deliver, and then they have to make a decision, is this their road forward? We are looking at S/4HANA from a long-term, when we talk finance. This is where we're going to get after some of those issues. And of course, you see the rest of the application stack. Maybe less exciting. The real exciting part on the top part is the BI platform. When we get all this data collected, how can we display this to the users? And this was one of the key drivers, if you go back to the previous slide, for 1.1, to show the visibility for that US CONUS network, to show that this platform can actually deliver the visibility that we're looking for. So more on that later. So what do we expect to see? So this is just kind of first we build out, and we talked about this earlier. We're building out the network, and slowly you'll start seeing this network being built out. And ultimately, within a few weeks, as we start dumping in EDIs coming out of the DLA GEX process, and for those, anybody from DLA here today? There you are. We need your help. None of these systems gets deployed without challenges at the process level, technical level, and OCM level. So again, we keep building. Globally, when we get to the end, the real ultimate goal we are after is global visibility. So here is just an example. Obviously, we'll have the CONUS. You see in the middle, the stuff going to Hawaii and, of course, Japan for 1.3. But ultimately, as this gets rolled out, whether it's on this platform or any other platform, doesn't matter. This gives you that single viewpoint. The next big question now for the department is how do you integrate this in with the common operating picture solutions that's out there? All these point solutions that's sitting in the universe. How does TRANSCOM play? What is that going to look like in the future so we can give the combatant commander what they've been looking for, one place to go to get my information. Got a few minutes left. I thought we would take a couple of questions. Rick?
I'll help you out getting started there.
Thanks, Pete. I paid him $20 by now.
With your organizational change management, is it the user experience, or is it the business process reengineering, or is it the understanding of the vision or where you're going? Where do you think you're experiencing this OCM difficulty that's slowing down your deployment? Thank you.
No, I think it's all of that. I won't say it's slowing down the deployment now. I mean, we're a few months in, but I think it's clearly the biggest challenge that we face. I think the way we're getting after it is by making it a government-owned process, right? So rather than hiring, my team hates me because we're manned at about 50% of where we should be, because I don't want to hire a bunch of contractors for short-term to come in and tell us how we're going to do this. So I mean, it is a government-led effort. It's the government team is making the decision. I mean, clearly we need the support of Telesto from an integration perspective, understanding the technology that we want to bring on board. But I mean, I think that's how we get after it, is putting government people, the people who own this, the people who are going to be behind the keyboard working this are the ones that are designing and making solutions. So I think that's the initial approach. Is it no? It's not perfect. I mean, it's tough, it's challenging, but I think ultimately that's the way that we've got to get after it. And being transparent. I mean, there's making sure folks have their voice in this, making sure that people understand this is not a fait accompli, right? I mean, we've got to row hard and demonstrate the capabilities and challenges and just tee up a decision. And I think if we're transparent and objective, I think we'll tee General Lyons up in a good place to make that call.
May I add to that?
Absolutely.
So I think from a user perspective, going back to the early days of these ERP deployments, when you speak to a transportation officer who today have to deploy a unit, he goes into this system and orders surface. On this system, swivel chairs over to do trucks. In another system to do air. Bill of lading's over here. And then he prints it all out and sends an email. He loves this stuff. So I don't think, that will not be the problem, in my opinion.
So just a question, is Class 8 as a commodity included into your prototype?
No, it is not. No. But I think while he's getting the mic, I mean, right now, I mean, given how much has to go into this from, getting sites prepared, getting systems integrated, right? We had to make some decisions on the cargo that we use. That's why we focused on DLA, AFIS, and specifically the Army. But our approach, I mean, cargo is cargo, equipment's equipment. So we're entering this that is Class 8 so unique that we couldn't handle it? No. Same thing with Class 5. So I think the longer term vision is that we'll treat these commodities very similarly, but right now it's on the prototype.
With the information that you had on a couple of your slides, so 90% of your cargo is handled by commercial carriers, and there's a 55.57% on-time delivery rate.
Yeah, I think that is notional. I think the example that Soren used in the dashboard is a notional look, right?
Well, with all the responsibilities getting the supplies out to the different combat commands, 4 of the past previous commanders at USTRANSCOM have asked the Congress to fund hybrid or cargo airships so that they can move from a vertical lift in the theater from a tactical, moving from strategic to tactical, and then get conventional carriers to bring in supplies. Is there any current agenda to try to improve the factory to foxhole delivery system, or is it we're still?
Yeah, so we're not using this prototype to get after new conveyances, if that answers your question. No.
Yeah, and I apologize for that number. That's a notional, not a reality number. Thank you. You're, by the way, the first. We've used that slide 3-4 times, so I appreciate the attention to detail. You must be some type of analyst. We'll talk later.
Retrograde is a huge problem. It's been a problem since the Civil War days. And so retrograde, hundreds of billions of dollars of items waiting to come back, reparable to get repaired. Is this part of your system? And that really almost has to start with the service and then get the demand signal back to you all at TRANSCOM. How is that going to work?
Right. So we designed the prototype and the scenarios so that we can't build every possible scenario into the prototype, but we can build scenarios so the senior leaders can infer how it would work. Right. So that when we're going to deploy 325, a BCT from Hawaii to JRTC, and then deploy to home station. So from doing those activities, we're going to do CONUS moves from home station, some guard moves to Fort McCoy in return. Hopefully we've designed those to be robust enough so that folks can make inferences of how it would work from a retrograde out of Afghanistan, as you mentioned.
Good morning, sir. Steve Martinez with the Center for Joint Strategic Logistics. So on the last point about sort of this idea of swivel seat management, there's an idea afoot about maybe laying in or putting together a strategy for how the joint logistics enterprise might approach this challenge of getting after the data that's resident in all these different stovepipes. What do you think that's enough to get everyone lined up, especially when a lot of these data stovepipes exist out in the services or in different agencies, or is it going to take something more along the lines of legislation or something, which either of those could in fact come back and realign or revector this effort in particular, or the things that Transportation Command might do?
Yeah, I don't know that I don't know that simply handling the transportation interface would be enough. I mean, to interface with it, as Soren mentioned, we're going to have to do a lot with source systems, right? So what are we doing with GFEBs? What are we doing with GCSS Army? What are we doing with DSS? Working very closely with DLA as they explore warehouse management system capability, right? So I think it's got to be more than the transportation management system alone, but how it integrates with the rest of the department. Which will hopefully get us to that more integrated supply chain. Soren, if you want to talk about the data a little bit.
Yeah, I think overall from a data perspective, I got to be careful, what I state is this is my own opinion, not a TRANSCOM related opinion. But overall, handling the data in terms of operationalizing it to how TRANSCOM going to consume this in TMS is one thing. We obviously have to do that. But then there's the historical piece, which we have no vision from a TMS point of view to consume that data. So we'll have a temporary issue that we got to get after. But long term, these data marts and things like that, the department is looking at is where that data needs to go, in our opinion. I'll leave it at that without telling you what's going to happen, because obviously I don't know.
Yeah, so I think to put to circle back, so I think we're looking at kind of two sets of data, right? So there's the historical data that Soren mentioned, where other parts of our command are looking at some big data capabilities to put in historical information, bring in some stream sets, Cloudera, some deep analytical capabilities to do predictive modeling, what could happen. I think you can do that kind of thing without the TM, but the transactional data. Right. I mean, what we're doing with other efforts won't get out of the transactional data like a TMS will. So I think understanding the different types of data that we have to deal with helps answer that as well.
One more question over here.
Yeah, Ron Stroop with the Federal Aviation Administration. I was wondering how agile and robust this system is going to be. From my perspective, how low do you go? You've got some dependency on the commercial side. My discussions with a lot of folks are the AI and the machine learning and stuff is kind of brittle in the uncertainty world. Because I can have a situation where I have an outage with my air traffic system, the airspace is shut down for a time being, an airport shut down overnight for runway. Shipping, you could see with a hack, we had some shipping lines that were shut down for a little bit, right? So how agile is this to work around that? You were talking a little bit about the historical, but the predictive, but how agile is it to work around some of those pop-up events?
So I'll let Soren address where he's seen it employed other places. We haven't moved any cargo with it yet, so I don't know. But I mean, that is a key part of our assessment criteria in making sure we're not assessing the TMS independently, but also assessing it against our current portfolio. Again, hypothesis, it will be more resilient than our current portfolio. But I mean, that is exactly part of our assessment criteria, how it improves our cyber posture that we've got our J6 team really getting after.
Yeah, I mean, from an overall planning point of view and execution, first of all, within the 24-month prototype, the 4 scenarios, we're not getting after those specific issues, just so we're clear. I mean, that's this reality of what we're trying to solve. But long term, it's our vision, if you saw going back to the view I gave up front, is that on the left side that we will integrate, that would be a capability long term as AI and these predictive models starts being more mature. And reality is they're really not mature today, right? I mean, if you go to the banking world, I've dealt with some of that on AI. The capability for AI is there, but from what we need, it's not there yet. And we also need to build the data set, which is number one for AI. And then you have some operational things we need to integrate long term. But in the 24 months capability, no, we're not getting after that.
Awesome. Thanks. Appreciate it. Thanks. Nice to meet you.